Hey everyone, welcome back. We've been taking a look at Hemingway and his representation of war in his literature. Last time we examined Soldier's Home. This one's going to take a look at the Big Two Arder River, which on the surface it seems as though it's just a fishing story, right? It seems like it should be in Field and Stream magazine or something along those lines. But really, this is a story about war, and the war is going to be that 7/8 underneath the water, right? That 7/8 of the iceberg that we don't necessarily see on the surface, right? So it's going to take some digging. I wanted to point out a couple of quotes as you kind of return and look at both parts, part one and part two, to think about how this is really a story about war. And it's kind of interesting because Hemingway starts the volume of In Our Time with Onychia Smyrna, which is a very graphic, very brutal representation of a conflict that happened in Greece. And then he ends it with this one, right? So I want you to think about as we kind of get back to our thoughts on Soldier's Home, and now as we turn to Nick Adams, right? Kind of the central character to these stories is there hope of recovery, right? Is there hope of Krebs to be able to recover? And with Nick, is there hope for him to be able to recover? And I wanted to take a look at Nick here. Now he's returned from war. Last time we took a look at him, he was hit in the spine. He was injured. Now he's at home and he's recuperating. I want you to think about why he returns to the woods of northern Michigan. This is where we kind of see him at the beginning of In Our Time with Indian Camp and the doctor and the doctor's wife, and also with The End of Something and The 3-Day Blow. He kind of returns there, right? So what is he seeking as he returns there? And I want you to think, what does he notice about the environment that he sees, right? So again, the setting is a big part of the story. It's going to help us to understand some of that underwater part of the story. And I want you to think about how does he respond to these elements of nature that he observes. The train went on up the track out of sight around one of the hills of burned timber. Nick sat down on the bundle of canvas and bedding the baggage man had pitched out of the door of the baggage car. There was no town, nothing but the rails in the burned-over country. The 13 saloons that had lined the one street of Seney had not left a trace. And what's interesting about this is I went to Seney, Michigan, which is in the northern part of the Upper Peninsula, a couple of years ago, just to check it out, and it's exactly, still to this day, 100 years later, it's still exactly as Hemingway describes here. The foundations of the mansion house stuck up above the ground. The stone was chipped and split by the fire. It was all that was left of the town of Seney. Even the surface had been burned off the ground. And so again, thinking about this, he's observing his environment without really actually actively thinking about it. And when you think about what does he notice about Seney, right? What's the one thing that he notices? That it's kind of burned, it's been torn down, it's been ripped apart, right? Much like he has been in his encounters with the war. Nick looked at the burned over stretch of the hillside, where he had expected to find the scattered houses of the town, and then walked down the railroad track to the bridge over the river. The river was there. It swirled against the log piles of the bridge. Nick looked down into the clear brown water color of the pebbly bottom and watched the trout keeping themselves steady in the current with their wavering fins. And so that's the second thing that he notices. He notices the trout. Now, why don't you think about what does he observe about them? In one way, right, kind of the surface level, we have a fisherman who's observing, right, his what he's going to be focusing on, catching fish. But there's something else, right, that he kind of notices. He notices that they keep themselves steady in the current with their wavering fins. What is Nick hoping to find, right? As he watched them, they changed their positions by quick angles, only to hold steady in the fast water again. Nick watched them for a long time. And I think that the importance here is how long he observes them. Nick's heart tightened as the trout moved. He felt all the old feeling. Again, he's kind of returning to what he once was. He turned and looked down the stream. It stretched away, pebbly bottom with the shallows and the big boulders and a deep pool as it curved away around the foot of the bluff. Nick walked up the ties to where his pack lay in the cinders beside the railway track. And I want you to think about also part of the underwater part of the iceberg is Nick's backpack, right? What does Nick's backpack have to do? What kind of supplies does he bring in? Why does he bring him? He was happy, right? And that's often, we don't see that in a Hemingway story just because people are confronted with a lot of unexpected violence and unexpected conflict. But here he feels happy. Why does he feel happy? Is it partly that he feels safe, right? Why does he feel safe here? He adjusted his pack harness around the bundle, pulling the straps tight, slung the pack on his back, got his arms through the shoulder straps, and took some of the pull off his shoulders by leaning his forehead against the wide band of the tump line. Still, it was too heavy, right? And I want you to think about why, right? What's all in there, and why is he packed so much? It was much too heavy. It was hard work walking uphill. His muscles ached, and the day was hot, but Nick felt happy. He felt he had left everything behind, the need for thinking, the need to write, other needs. It was all back of him, right? So what is he doing there? What's he seeking? For the time he had gotten down off the train, and the baggage man had thrown his pack out of the open car door, things had been different. Seney was burned, the country was burned over and changed, but it did not matter. It could not all be burned. He knew that. Again, what connections is he making without actually, consciously thinking about it? What connections is he making about himself? As he smoked, his legs stretched out in front of him. He noticed a grasshopper walk along the ground and up onto his woolen sock. The grasshopper was black. As he had walked along the road climbing, he had started many grasshoppers from the dust. They were all black. They were not the big grasshoppers with yellow and black or red and black wings whirring from their black wing sheathing as they fly up. These were just ordinary hoppers, but all sooty black in color. Nick had wondered about them as he walked without really thinking about them. Now, as he watched the black hopper that was nibbling at the wool of his sock with its four-way lip, he realized that they had all turned black from living in the burned-over land. He realized that the fire must have come the year before, but the hoppers were all black now. He wondered how long they would stay that way. And again, much like what we see with the trout, right? Nick is thinking about things, and he's noticing that they are charred, that they are damaged, that they have trauma in their past, and he's making connections, right? Subconscious connections about himself. Nick, and as we kind of continue on, I'm going to kind of skip around in some of the story. Across the open mouth of the tent, Nick fixed cheesecloth to keep out mosquitoes. He crawled inside under the mosquito bar with various things from the pack to put at the head of his bed under the slant of the canvas. Inside the tent, the light came through the brown canvas. It smelled pleasantly of canvas, whatever that means. I guess it's kind of this old kind of camping kind of smell that he's recognizing. Already there was something mysterious and homelike. Nick was happy as he crawled inside the tent. He had not been unhappy all day. This was different, though. Now things were done. There had been this to do. Now it was done. There had been a hard trip. He was very tired. That was all. That was done. He had made his camp. He was settled. Nothing could touch him. Right? Again, even though this isn't about war specifically, we still feel that it's there, right? It was a good place to camp. He was there in the good place. It was his home where he had made it. Now he was hungry. Nick drank the coffee according to Hopkins. The coffee was bitter. Nick laughed. It was a good ending to the story. His mind was starting to work. He knew he could choke it because he was tired enough, right? So there's a story in there that I'll have you guys kind of read on your own that it's important to the context, but I don't want to read through everything. I want you guys to start making these connections on your own. But what is he really trying to do, right? As he starts to make his camp, he's constantly going through this checklist, right? What is a checklist really doing for him, right? His mind was starting to work. Now that everything was done, his mind starts to work. But he knew he could choke it because he was tired enough. What is he trying not to do on this particular trip, right? Something to consider. Taking a look at part 2, right? I want you to take a look at the fish that he catches, when he catches them and when he doesn't. There was a long tug. Nick struck and the rod came alive and dangerous, bent double. The line tightening, coming out of the water, tightening. all in a heavy, dangerous, steady pull. Nick felt the moment when the leader would break if the strain increased and let the line go. The reel ratcheted into a mechanical shriek as the line went out in a rush. Too fast. Nick could not check it. The line rushed out, the reel note rising as the line ran out. With the core of the reel showing, his heart feeling stopped with excitement. Leaning back against the current that mounted icily his thighs, Nick thumbed the reel hard with his left hand. It was awkward getting his thumb inside the flywheel frame. As he put the pressure on the line tightened into a sudden hardness. And beyond the logs, a huge trout went high out of the water. As he jumped, Nick lowered the tip of the rod, but he felt, as he dropped the tip to ease the strain, the moment when the strain was too great. The hardness too tight, of course, the leader had broken. There was no mistaking the feeling when all the spring left the line, and it became dry and hard. Then it went slack, right? So I want you to think about, why is he unsuccessful in this particular moment? And then how does he respond to this? Nick's hand was shaky, right? I want you to think back about those criteria for PTSD, right? That physiological reactivity, right? The idea that our body starts to respond to triggers. He reeled in slowly. The thrill had been too much. He felt vaguely a little sick, and we've seen that with Krebs before, as though it would be better to sit down. Ahead, the river narrowed and went into a swamp. The river became smooth and deep, and the swamp looked solid with cedar trees. Their trunks close together, their branches solid. It would not be possible to walk through a swamp like that. The branches grew so low, you would have to keep almost level with the ground to move at all. You could not crash through the branches. That must be why the animals that lived in swamps were built the way they were, Nick thought. He wished he had brought something to read. He felt like reading. He did not feel like going into the swamp. And I want you to think about why, right? Some of the things that he notices about nature. He looked down the river. The big cedar slanted all the way across the stream. Beyond the river went into the swamp. Nick did not want to go in there now. He felt a reaction against deep wading, with the water deepening under his armpits, to hook big trout in places impossible to land them. In the swamp, the banks were bare. The cedars came together overhead. The sun did not come through except in patches. In the vast, deep water, in the half-light, the fishing there would be tragic. In the swamp, fishing was a tragic adventure. Again, what's he trying to avoid, right, in this fishing trip? Nick did not want it. He did not want to go down the stream any further today. Nick stood up on the log, holding his rod, landing net hanging heavy, then stepped into the water and splashed ashore. He climbed the bank and cut up the woods toward the high ground. He was going back to camp. He looked back. The river was just showed through the trees. There were plenty of days coming when he could fish the swamp. Now, I want you to think about this story, right? How is it, in what ways is it a story that's not really about fishing, but it's more about the war that's kind of in the past that Nick is still struggling to overcome? In what ways do we see Nick still struggling with PTSD within this particular story? And one way, right, we kind of showed some of those elements. One way that we see this is with his backpack, right? This is all the stuff, this is what academics do when maybe they have too much time on their hands, but someone put together an itemized list of everything that Nick mentions and that he puts in his backpack. And so here we have an expert fisherman, Nick, going back into the woods, who is pretty sure that he's going to catch something, but he brings all of this material with him, right? And so in some ways, right, and we talked about it, the heaviness of the backpack, in some ways he does this in order to control his environment, to make sure that in case he doesn't succeed, he still will have, quote unquote, a good trip. That'll be a pleasant trip, right? But in some ways, this is kind of a metaphor for the baggage, the emotional baggage that Nick carries, right? So again, I mean, it takes a little bit of work for this particular story, but some literary critics call The Big Two-Hearted River a nightmare at noonday. And if you kind of pay attention to some of these elements and what's really going on with Nick and what's going on within his head, we start to realize that it's not really about fishing. It's about something much deeper. It's about something much more problematic.